Most people believe they are thinking. But what if almost everything you call a thought is actually a reaction? What if your opinions, your outrage, your desires, even the way you see yourself, were planted inside you long before you ever became aware of them? Pause for a second and look carefully at the modern world. A headline appears, and millions react instantly. A trend goes viral, and people repeat it without reflection. Someone says something controversial online, and within minutes entire crowds are emotionally mobilized like programmed machines. No silence, no analysis, no hesitation, only reaction. Immediate, emotional, automatic reaction. And this is where the real danger begins. Because the moment a human being loses the ability to pause and think independently, he becomes controllable, predictable, manipulable. History has shown this repeatedly. Entire civilizations have collapsed not because people were physically weak, but because they stopped questioning what entered their minds. They stopped distinguishing truth from stimulation. And today, for the first time in history, the systems competing for your attention are more powerful than your own awareness. Algorithms study your impulses more carefully than you study your own thoughts. Corporations know how to trigger your emotions before you even understand what you feel. Politicians no longer persuade through reason. They provoke through outrage. And the most disturbing part is this: most people do not even realize it is happening. They believe they are thinking while merely reacting to carefully engineered psychological triggers. This video is not just about society. It is about you, about whether your mind still belongs to you or whether it has quietly become a battlefield occupied by forces you barely notice. And by the end of this journey, you may begin to see why the greatest form of modern slavery is not physical control. It is unconscious reaction. There is a reason ancient philosophers treated self-awareness almost like a sacred discipline. They understood something modern society has forgotten. The human mind is extremely vulnerable to influence when left unexamined. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. But today, most people do not choose their thoughts consciously. Their thoughts are selected for them, curated, filtered, fed into their minds hour after hour through screens they carry everywhere. The average person wakes up and immediately enters a stream of stimulation before their own mind even has time to form a clear, independent thought. Notifications, news feeds, messages, videos, opinions, advertisements, outrage, noise, endless psychological noise. And because this process repeats every single day, people slowly lose the ability to distinguish between what they genuinely believe and what they have simply absorbed through repetition. This is one of the oldest psychological mechanisms in existence. Familiarity creates perceived truth. The more often the brain encounters an idea, the more natural and correct it begins to feel, regardless of whether it is actually true. That is why propaganda has always relied on repetition rather than intelligence. The goal is not to convince you logically. The goal is to condition you emotionally until reaction replaces reflection. The terrifying part is that reaction feels like thinking. That is why so few people recognize the difference. A person sees a political headline and instantly feels anger. He assumes the anger itself proves understanding. Another person watches a short video online and immediately adopts its conclusion because it emotionally resonates with existing beliefs. Again, reaction masquerades as intelligence. But real thinking is slower, more uncomfortable. It requires uncertainty. It requires the willingness to say, "I may be wrong." And modern culture punishes that kind of humility, Social media rewards certainty, speed, confidence, outrage, emotional intensity, not depth, not patience, not careful analysis. If you hesitate too long, you disappear beneath the algorithm. So people train themselves to react instantly, because instant reaction is socially rewarded. Over time, this conditioning becomes automatic. The nervous system itself adapts to stimulation. People become psychologically addicted to emotional activation. Calmness begins to feel unnatural. Silence feels empty. Reflection feels boring. And once a population loses its tolerance for silence, it also loses its capacity for thought. Friedrich Nietzsche warned about this long before technology existed in its current form. He feared the rise of what he called the last man, a creature obsessed with comfort, distraction, and shallow pleasure. A person who avoids difficulty at all costs. A person who no longer seeks truth, because truth demands effort and discomfort. Look around carefully and you can see this transformation everywhere. People no longer ask whether something is true. They ask whether it is entertaining, whether it aligns with their tribe, whether it protects their identity. And identity itself has become one of the greatest prisons of thought. The moment a person emotionally attaches himself to an ideology, a political group, or a social narrative, his mind begins filtering reality selectively. He stops searching for truth and starts searching for confirmation. This is confirmation bias, one of the most powerful distortions in human psychology. Once people emotionally invest in a belief, they unconsciously reject evidence that threatens it. Not because they are stupid, but because the brain prioritizes psychological safety over objective truth. To question deeply held beliefs feels dangerous because identity is attached to them. So instead of thinking critically, people defend themselves emotionally. They react. This is why modern discussions feel almost impossible. Most conversations are no longer explorations of reality. They are collisions between identities. Each side enters already convinced, already emotionally committed, already prepared to defend rather than understand. Real dialogue disappears because genuine dialogue requires openness, and openness requires ego restraint. But ego thrives on certainty. The ego wants to be right because being wrong threatens the image people have constructed of themselves. That is why intelligent people can still become trapped in collective delusion. Intelligence alone does not guarantee independent thought. In fact, highly intelligent people often become even better at rationalizing their emotional reactions. They use intellect not to discover truth, but to defend identity. History is filled with brilliant minds who supported destructive ideologies because intelligence without self-awareness easily becomes sophisticated self-deception. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed the greatest danger to humanity was unconsciousness, not evil in the dramatic sense, but unconsciousness. People acting without understanding the hidden forces driving them. People projecting fears, desires, insecurities, and frustrations outward without recognizing them internally. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That is exactly what happens in modern society. People absorb narratives unconsciously and then mistake them for personal conviction. They react emotionally to symbols, slogans, and tribal signals while believing they are exercising independent thought. But independent thought is rare because it demands something painful: separation from the crowd. Most human beings fear social isolation more than intellectual dishonesty. Evolution conditioned us this way because survival once depended on group belonging. Thousands of years ago, rejection from the tribe could mean death. And even today, the nervous system still interprets social exclusion as a serious threat. That is why conformity feels psychologically safe. Agreeing with the group reduces tension. Challenging collective assumptions creates anxiety. So most people unconsciously adapt themselves to whatever environment surrounds them. They absorb the emotional atmosphere of the crowd without realizing it. Gustave Le Bon wrote extensively about crowd psychology and observed that individuals often lose rationality once absorbed into a collective emotional state. Crowds amplify emotion while suppressing reasoning, and social media has essentially turned the entire world into one permanent psychological crowd. Millions reacting simultaneously, millions reinforcing each other's outrage, fear, excitement, and tribal hostility. The result is emotional contagion on a global scale. The same remains true today. The person who truly thinks critically often feels alienated from mass culture because he notices contradictions others ignore. He sees how emotionally manipulated public discourse has become. He recognizes that many people are not communicating ideas anymore. They are performing identities, signaling tribal loyalty, reacting reflexively to stimuli designed to provoke them. And because the majority participates unconsciously, the conscious observer can feel deeply isolated. But isolation is sometimes the price of clarity. One of the greatest signs that someone has stopped thinking independently is the inability to tolerate ambiguity. Mature thought accepts that many questions do not have simple answers. But reactive minds crave certainty because certainty reduces anxiety. That is why simplistic ideologies spread so easily during periods of social instability. Fear pushes people toward rigid explanations. Complexity feels exhausting. Nuance feels weak. So populations become psychologically vulnerable to anyone offering emotionally satisfying certainty. This has happened throughout history repeatedly. Entire societies surrender critical thought in exchange for emotional reassurance. And once enough people stop thinking independently, collective irrationality becomes normalized. You can already see signs of this everywhere. People consuming information not to understand reality, but to reinforce emotional identity. Public conversations collapsing into outrage competitions. Individuals losing the ability to engage opposing ideas without hostility. Attention spans deteriorating so severely that sustained reflection feels almost impossible. The consequences extend beyond politics or media. They affect relationships, mental health, creativity, spirituality, even personal identity. Because the reactive mind cannot build depth. Depth requires stillness, and stillness is disappearing. But perhaps the most dangerous consequence of all is this: people who never think deeply become strangers to themselves. They spend so much time reacting externally that they never investigate internally. They do not know where their beliefs came from. They do not know why certain ideas emotionally trigger them. They do not know whether their ambitions are truly theirs or socially implanted desires absorbed unconsciously through culture. They move through life driven by invisible programming while calling it personality. And this creates a profound emptiness because meaning cannot emerge from unconscious living. The philosopher Kierkegaard warned that the greatest danger is losing oneself quietly while appearing completely normal externally. That perfectly describes the modern condition. Many people function socially while remaining psychologically disconnected from their own inner reality. They know how to consume, react, signal opinions, and follow trends, but they do not know how to encounter themselves honestly. And without self-knowledge, independent thought becomes almost impossible because unexamined fears and desires distort perception continuously. So what is the solution? It begins with reclaiming attention. Attention is not just a mental resource. It is your life itself. Whatever controls your attention gradually shapes your consciousness. If your attention is constantly fragmented by external stimulation, your inner world becomes fragmented as well. But when you learn to direct attention intentionally, thought deepens. Awareness sharpens. You begin noticing your own reactions before they fully possess you. You become less impulsive, less emotionally programmable, more grounded. So the next time you feel immediate outrage, immediate certainty, immediate emotional activation, pause for a moment. Ask yourself whether you are truly thinking or simply reacting. Ask whether the emotion arose naturally or was triggered intentionally. Ask whether the belief is genuinely yours or merely inherited unconsciously from the environment around you. These questions may seem simple, but they represent the beginning of intellectual freedom, because the greatest revolution in the modern world is no longer political. It is psychological. The battle is no longer merely for territory or resources. It is for human attention, perception, and consciousness itself. And the individuals who learn to protect their minds from unconscious reaction may become the last truly free people left. Most people don't think anymore. They just react. But you do not have to remain one of them. You can choose awareness over impulse, reflection over emotional conditioning, truth over comfort. And that choice, repeated consistently, can transform not only the way you see the world, but the way you exist within it. Because the moment you stop reacting automatically and start thinking consciously, you reclaim something. Modern society quietly steals from millions every single day: your mind.